Hey everybody, this is Dawn with Painted Willow Art. I wanted to jump on for two different reasons today. I did a couple of videos last week showing you some easy abstract art techniques to use um, as a way to start using art to help manage stress and anxiety. And in both of those videos, I mentioned that I have more classes coming up and that I was in the process of scheduling those. I was hoping to have those dates out over the weekend, and I did not get that done. I've had a couple of collaborative events come up, which is a good thing, collaborative events as far as teaching these techniques, but it has meant some reworking of the schedule a little bit. So I'm hoping to have that done in the next day or two, um, and have those out for you. I will be posting them here and on Facebook once I get them finalized. So if you want to make sure that you see the notices of the classes, if you're interested in that, there's a couple different things you can do. You can turn on the notifications for my posts to make sure that you see them, or you can go to my bio. I'm not sure on this video which corner it's in, but click on my name up there, Painted Willow Art, and go to my bio. And if you click the link there, it'll take you to my link tree. And on that link tree, there is a specific link to click to get on my email group. And I will be emailing the notice of all the classes to them as well. So a couple different ways you can find the classes if you've taken a look at these methods and this is something you want to learn more about. We go much more into depth in the classes. We add some additional intentionality into it, do some different things, but this was at least a way to get people started if you want to. And so since I don't have the classes ready yet, the schedule ready yet, I wanted to do a follow-up to those two videos from last week to show you some additional options, because I certainly don't want you to think that the two things I showed you last week are the only way to do this. There are more options than you can count. It just kind of depends on um, which piece of the method you like the most and your creativity and what to do with it. You can modify these techniques in so many different ways so that you can continue to use this but not have a practice that gets boring. It will be a practice that is always different and always changing, but still giving you the same benefits. So I'm going to turn the camera down again so you can see what's in front of me, and show you some things last week. My camera set here, hang on a second. Last week we took a look at three different really quick methods. With this one, we did nothing more than just draw some lines on the paper in all different directions, and then we rounded off the corners by just giving it a little swoop to the corner instead of it being the sharp 90-degree angled corner. And then we added some color to it as well. From there, we did a little bit of a modification of that, in that we did the lines on the paper again, different kinds of lines, straight lines, curved lines, whatever, but instead of rounding the corners, we took and just traced inside the different shapes. So it kind of made it look like it had a border, and then again added color in it in a bunch of different ways. This one we just continued tracing that border shape over and over and over again. So there were a couple of different options on that one. And then this one we kind of did the same thing, only used more curvy lines, but again did the border on it in different ways and looked at some different ways to add color. So those were the real quick, easy places to start. But this is certainly not the only way you can do this. So I'm going to show you a few options. And these options are going to have multiple stages of it on the same page just so I can illustrate it. For me, the rounding the corners is the piece that I really like the best. As big a fan as I am of color and all things bright and pretty, for whatever reason, the rounding the corners for me is where I notice the biggest shift. That's where I notice my brain quiets down and my body starts to relax and my breathing frees up and deepens. So if you tried some of those techniques last week and you noticed that with the rounding corners, that's the piece that kicks in the most for you, there's lots of different ways you can do that. With this one, hang on a second, I need to grab something. with this one, I just drew a bunch of squares on the paper. You can do them freehand if you want to. I used a template just to make it quick and easy. So I was looking around my studio to see what I had, and I had this business card from my wonderful friend at Artistic Isle that makes the most yummy handmade watercolors. And her card is square. So I started with that and just put it here and there all over the page and traced around it randomly. There's really no rhyme or reason to the design. And then I took one of my business cards because it's fairly thick as well, and mine has rounded corners, so I just cut the rounded corners off and I just eyeballed it. I didn't measure it, so it's square-ish. And then I did the same thing. I just started putting it all over the page so that all of these squares overlap. And you can see over here on this side, you can kind of see the square pattern. They all overlap, and it's pretty random. There's really no rhyme or reason to how those shapes are on there. And then from there, I just started rounding the corners. So again, with rounding a corner, we're taking that 90 degrees, and if I had a pen that worked, it would be really helpful. I'm going to do it with this one. This is a ballpoint pen. I think in all the videos I've used Sharpies just because I have some kind of weird Sharpie addiction. But a ballpoint pen works just as fine. This is a Papermate Inkjoy gel pen, and it works just the same. So again, with rounding the corners, we're doing nothing more than taking that 90 degrees and just drawing a little partial circle on all sides of it to round it off and make it a little smoother. So all I've done with these squares after I drew them on is just start rounding off my corners. And you can make this as intricate or as open as you want by how many squares you put on the page. There's no right answer as to how many or how few. Start with something that just feels like a good place to start. And if you get through rounding all your corners and you still want to do some more of that, just put your templates back on there or draw some more freehand, however you've chosen to do it. And as you draw more on there, you're inherently creating more intersections. And all of those intersections are the places you're going to round the corners. So there's another option. I have left all of these that I'm going to show you black and white, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But you could also certainly add color to this when you're done if you choose to. You're really kind of taking advantage of which part of the process you notice works the best for you. If it's the rounding corners, this is a great way to start without having to put too much thought into it. If it's the color, you don't even have to round the corners. You could just go straight to coloring the shapes if you wanted to. Either way works. There's a lot of flexibility in these methods. So, as you try them and start doing them, and notice which pieces seem to make you feel the best and that you get the most calming effect from, use those pieces the most by finding ways to do them more than anything else. Okay, so there's that one. This one is circles, essentially done the same way. And I think, yeah, essentially done the same way with another option over here as well. So I started by just drawing circles, and you can draw them freehand. I wanted these to be fairly precise circles, and I have this cool little tool that I got online on Amazon for just a few bucks that lets you put a pencil in it and swirl it around and draw different sizes of circles, and then it's also got some smaller circle templates on it as well. If I do that, you can see it better, yeah. So in doing this, I wasn't measuring them necessarily. I was just putting this on the page, and when you do that, you can pick a hole and just do this. I don't know, those of you that are old enough to remember spirograph, it's kind of the same concept. So it fairly quickly allows you to draw all kinds of different sizes of circles on your page. And that's what I did. I just put that all over the paper randomly, made them overlap each other, and just put what I thought looked good at the time as far as quantity. From there, I rounded the corners, again, because that's my favorite part. So I rounded all of my corners. And then when I got over here, I decided I wanted to keep going. I still wanted to spend more time on this. So like the concept we did on the two last week, I just traced inside this shape And I did it over and over and over and over again, following the contour until I got to the middle and I couldn't do any more. So where each of these creates its own shape, like right here, for instance, all I did was just trace inside there and continue doing that in and in and in until you get all the way to the middle and there's nothing left to do. You don't have to be terribly precise about it. You notice it didn't follow that line exactly. It's a little wiggly and wobbly, and that's okay. To me, it kind of adds some motion to it. It gives it some visual interest, which I like as well. I usually do these drawings for the process of doing it, but I like when they come out with interesting designs or they come out pretty. They don't always, but when they do, it's an added benefit. So you don't have to be really precise about how you trace this in. If it gets a little wiggly, it just adds some interest to it, and it's perfectly okay. I should mention, in doing these, I used an extra fine point Sharpie to make my circles and my squares on the last one, because sometimes the fine point Sharpie, the lines are really, really thick. And if we look at the lines on this one compared to the lines on this one, this was with a fine point Sharpie, and they're fairly thick. I didn't want them to be that thick on here because I wanted space to be able to do this tracing. So just kind of decide, depending on which method of this you're doing, what size pen you want to use. The fine point Sharpies are fine. I often use the ultra fine points, or something like this ballpoint pen gives you a nice fine line as well. And if you've done a finer line for your circles, your squares, whatever shape you're using, oftentimes that finer Sharpie makes rounding the corners a little bit easier too. So use whatever size pen you want. Also, I have done these in black and white just so they show up on the camera really well, but you can do them with whatever color marker you want as well. It doesn't have to be in black and white. So that's another option. This is another option yet. So if you have tried the other methods and you found that the rounding corners part was not your favorite, which some people do. Some people find that really tedious, and that's perfectly okay. This is another option that doesn't use the rounding corners. So I started with a ruler and just drew random straight lines all over my page. How many lines is completely up to you. The more you use, the more intricate and interesting this pattern is going to look. If you use fewer lines, then these are just going to be bigger, but either way is perfectly fine. Once I had all those lines on there, I just randomly pick a corner in one of the spaces and start drawing straight lines from there. So for instance, on this one right here, I'm going to start at this little corner right here in the middle. Let me turn this so you can see it. I'm going to start at this little corner here, and I'm going to draw a straight line right straight out from it. And then I'm going to start at that same point and just fan those lines out. I'm keeping them fairly close together. I'm not measuring anything. This is just eyeball. They're not perfectly straight. That's okay. Much like the other one, it adds a little bit of movement and interest to it when they're not straight. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So essentially I'm just filling that whole shape with these straight lines, and these straight lines are all starting from the same point. Because they're starting from the same point, that's where you get this little dark spot in the middle. So you can see where these dark spots are. That's just because that's where I started drawing, and because I'm starting from the same point each time, it automatically creates that dark spot. That's not anything you have to color. And you're just basically going to do that same thing with all of these shapes, just picking at random the point you want to start from. So you get an interesting look. You get the same calming and meditative qualities as the other styles of this we've done, because you're still occupying your hand with something repetitive. And by doing that, you're focusing your mind on what you're doing and paying attention to what you're drawing. Whoops, keep going off my camera, don't I? So you get the same benefits, you just don't have the rounding corners. So if you don't like the rounded corners, do something like this. And you could certainly do this with the circle one as well. There is absolutely no reason you couldn't take something like this And instead of rounding the corners and doing this inside tracing method, there's no reason you couldn't take this and do the exact same technique that we just did on the squares. Pick a spot to start from, and then draw out in a fan shape from there, starting at the same point each and every time. By starting at that same point, you're going to create a dark spot. So you kind of get almost the idea of the rounded corners without actually having to round the corners. And then from there, again, just pick a random spot and just keep going. Keep doing that same thing over and over and over and over and over again. So you get the same kind of idea, just done with circles instead of squares. It works with either shape. It will work with any shape. It doesn't even have to necessarily be circles, squares, or you know, fairly linear geometric shapes. It could be, you could start with an amoeba shape and it would be just fine. This is another option still. This one is a little more complicated in terms of paying attention, not complicated in terms of how you create it. So if you like rounding the corners, this might be another good one to try for you because it follows along a similar concept of the rounding corners. Much like the first one with the circles I showed you, I just used my circle tool to draw random circles all over the page of all different kinds of sizes. So no specific number or specific pattern, just all over the place. And then what I did is I started with one area. And the idea here is that you're alternating black and white. Now on this one, I drew it with the ballpoint pen, the circles with the ballpoint pen, but I'm choosing to color it in with a Sharpie because I'm coloring in bigger areas and it's easier to do with a bigger pen. So with the idea of alternating the colors is, say I'm going to start here, for instance, and I'm going to decide that this guy right here is going to be black. So if that's my starting spot, I'm going to color him in black, or whatever color you choose. Like I mentioned earlier, you can use whatever marker color, colored pencil, whatever you want. So I'm coloring that one, and that's my starting spot. That's going to be black. If I'm alternating, then this one's going to be white. And I'm still alternating, so this little guy sticking in here is going to be black as well, right? Which means this guy's going to be white because I'm alternating. If this little guy's white, then that means this whole big area is black, right? So we color this whole thing in black. And I'm probably not going to do the whole thing just to save a little bit of time, but to give you the idea here. And I'm doing a super messy coloring job just because I'm trying to hurry. So you get the idea here of the alternating colors: black, white, black, white, black, white, black, white, black, white, because this whole shape is going to be black. And it's not too terribly hard to follow once you get going and get your pattern established. It just takes getting a couple colored in first, and the pattern is fairly easy to follow. But because it's a little more intricate, you do have to work a little bit harder to keep your focus on it, which is good if you're trying to quiet your brain. You're keeping your brain active, looking for the next place that I'm coloring. So we're going to do this one black as well. So if you like the rounding corners, this might be another one that you like. And I've done it with circles just because circles they're my favorite shape to work with. I just like the softness of them. I prefer that to the linear, what I would consider a harder shape of a square or a rectangle or a triangle. But you can really do this with any shape you want. And if you don't want to start with basic shapes like circles, squares, triangles, you could do it with hearts. You could do it with, you could take something and make it amoeba shaped and do the same thing. Just draw them all over the top of each other, overlapping them like I did the circles, and it works the exact same way. You could start with something like this and then throw some circles or squares with it. You don't even have to use the same shape on the page. You can vary your shapes, use circles and squares or hearts and triangles, or whatever you want. Oops, other way. So hopefully you can see what I've done here, how this starts. You just start with one spot and then alternate your color so that every other space is white and every other space is black, or if you're using other colors, whatever those other colors are, alternate them back and forth. So you kind of get the idea there. I love all of these alternate idea techniques because they are easily portable as well. Everything I've shown you on a fairly large piece of paper, but I actually carry a sketchbook with me. This is, I think, 5.5 by 8.5. I carry a sketchbook and a couple of Sharpies wherever I go because these are nice to be able to just sit down and spend 10 or 15 minutes maybe on a lunch break, or if you're waiting for a doctor's appointment, or something like that. Just sit down and start doing one of these, whichever what you like best, or use a combination of all of them to create your own method. Like I said, for me, circles are my favorite, and I like the rounding the corners. So I had just done a couple of pages already where I had just put circles all over them, so I have them ready to go, and then I can sit down and just round the corners while I'm waiting for something, while I'm waiting at the doctor's office, or waiting to pick somebody up somewhere, waiting to pick my groceries up, whatever it might be. I just sit and round my corners. And all of these that I've shown you, I've done in black and white just because for one, it shows up better on camera. For two, I kind of like the black and white look. I am usually a fan of color. The more colorful, the brighter, the better. But for whatever reason, I really quite, trying to get these all on here, I'm not sure I'm going to get it done. I really quite dig the whole black and white concept of these. So again, there's the flexibility in the method. You can color them if you want to. You don't have to. You can leave them black and white if you want. If the drawing part of the process, like this one, the straight lines, or maybe this one, the tracing, or if it's the rounding corners, is the part you like the best, use that part the most. And if that means you don't color things because you don't want to, that's perfectly okay. If you do a bunch of these and you decide later you want to go back in and color them, you can do that as well. It's completely up to you. So there are a ton of options in terms of how you can use abstract art techniques to help control stress and anxiety. And again, the way these work is that you're occupying your physical body. So you're getting that in the mix, and as part of occupying your physical body, your brain has to be paying attention to what you're doing with your hand. And so that inherently breaks the loop of worry thinking and stress thinking and, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And what do we do about this? And when is this going to end? And, all of those kind of loops you can get into because you're concentrating on what you're doing with your hand. So it's a tag team approach that is extremely effective. So there you go. If you want to add a little more intentionality to it, particularly if you're finding yourself obsessively worrying about something, on the back of your paper, flip it over and write down what you're worried about. I know right now a lot of people are worried about finances with the job situation and things closed down. So maybe that's your worry. So you could write something on the back of here like, I'm worried about my financial situation, and through the process of this drawing, I'm going to quiet my mind enough to open the door for ideas to help with that situation. And that's kind of intention setting. You're putting your worry down here, getting it out of your body for starters by putting it on the paper, and you're telling yourself, I'm going to be open to ideas to help with this. And then you turn it over and you start your drawing. With that intentionality in mind, as you're drawing and your brain starts to quiet, you will likely find that you will have ideas pop into your head that maybe you hadn't thought of before. Maybe an alternative way to make money in the time being, maybe a way to save money somewhere, maybe a subscription to something you forgot you had pops into mind, and oh, I can go cancel that because I'm not using it, so I'm going to save a little bit of money there. So you can add a little more intentionality to this by going to it with a specific concern or idea. You can do the same as a gratitude practice to bring in more of the good things. On the back of your paper, write down 5 or 6 things you're grateful for, and then set the intention that you are not only grateful for those things, but you are opening the door for more good things to come. And as you're doing the drawing process and your brain quiets, you might find that you're able to think of more things you're grateful for, or find opportunities to do more things like the things that you're grateful for. All kinds of creative ideas can pop in when you're doing this because you're taking your brain out of its habitual thinking and you're giving it a more creative perspective simply by doing something creative. So there you go for today. I think I'm going to stop there because this video ended up a whole lot longer than I intended it to be. But I wanted to give you a follow-up to the 2 videos last week and at least hopefully illustrate to you that there's a lot of flexibility in a practice like this. There's lots of different things you can do, lots of different ways to use it. So if you are game to try any of these other methods, I would love to see what you're doing. Please feel free to post them and tag me if you feel like it. If you don't want to do it publicly, I'm always happy to get messages and emails from you and to encourage you in the process because I really, really believe, sorry, I keep looking at the ones that are on the table over there. I really, really believe in the strength and the power of using methods like this to help, not only just manage stress and anxiety, but literally change the way you think. I use these methods all the time in various different forms, and I have for better than a decade. I've actually done some form of it all my life. I just didn't realize what I was doing until about a decade ago. Give it a try. Let me know how you do with it. If you have questions, absolutely email me or message me. I'm happy to answer questions. And hopefully I will have a new class schedule out. Sorry, my throat's a little dry. Hopefully I will have the new class schedule out in a couple of days as soon as I get some of these collaborative projects nailed down as far as dates. So keep an eye out for that as well. And happy drawing. Give them a shot. Okay? See you later.